Do you ever wish that your dog can do this? Denver, water? Yes, nice job, buddy. Teaching your dog to retrieve a drink from the fridge isn't just a cool party trick. It can also be an important service dog task if you need your dog to retrieve water, a snack, or even medication in a crisis. Today, I'm going to walk you through how to train this behavior step by step. From introducing the fridge and how to set your dog up for success, to understanding back chaining and why I use it to train the fridge retrieve, to troubleshooting tips. Whether you're training a service dog or just want to have your dog fetch you an adult beverage at a party, this behavior is both helpful and a great way to hone you and your dog's skills. Hi, I'm Laura from Doggy U, and I'm a certified guide dog mobility instructor, service dog trainer, and trick trainer, and I teach every one of my dogs to fetch a beverage from the fridge, so today I'm going to teach you. So today we're going to be teaching this fridge behavior with the concept of back chaining. So let me grab my whiteboard so we can talk a little bit about this training concept and why it's great for your dog. Back chaining is when you train the last behavior first and then work your way up the chain. Because when we train this last behavior first, the dog always knows what behavior is coming next, and they're strongest on the last behavior that is usually the weakest if you train it down this way because they've done the last behavior so many times. So this provides clarity for the dog, it's great for complex tricks, and it can make your dog more successful and feel more successful within the trick because they know what comes next. Now we're going to be looking at this in groupings. So we have the turn back and shut the fridge. So that's the shut the door portion. We have the retrieving portion and we have the opening portion. So each one of these is its own portion and we can train them backwards so that they have the most experience with the last one, and that is called back chaining. So when we're looking at back chaining, we need to lay out all of the steps. So when we're talking about getting a beverage from the fridge, there are different steps to that. So first is the pick up the rope and hold. So I have a rope attached to the fridge. That's how the dog is going to be able to get into the fridge. They need to be able to hold it in their mouth, and then they need to be able to walk backwards. Now, there is the option of teaching them to tug, but that is really going to depend on the dog. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about that later and where you can get the resources to teach each one of these steps. After we have them picking up the rope and pulling it to open the fridge, we then need to be able to drop the rope. This is a step people often miss, and then you have a dog holding a rope trying to retrieve the beverage from the fridge, which doesn't work out that well. Take it, drop. Nice, good job. Then we need to locate and pick up the water or whatever other item that your dog is going to be getting out of the fridge. You're going to need to go and bring that item to the handler, and then they need to turn back towards the fridge and shut the fridge. So those are the steps broken down for the retrieve. And any complex behavior, you can break into little steps like this so you know what you have to train. Because the first thing that you need to do is train each one of these steps by themselves. You can't train this whole behavior without training each step to fluency. Making a list like this, it makes that a little bit easier so you can check off, okay, we know how to do this one well, we know how to do this one well. It's never a good idea to use half-finished behaviors to try and make a complex chain because then the behavior is going to break down under pressure. And hey y'all, if you're liking this video so far, I would love it if you would head on down and boop that like button. Doing so positively reinforces me and lets me know that you want more videos like this one. And now I know I've said it so many times on this channel, but it's worth saying again, foundations are key. You want to do fun, flashy stuff, you gotta spend the time on the foundations. So before we talk about each one of these steps and how we train them, we first need to talk about fridge setup to set your dog up for success. We want to clean out that fridge as much as possible so we limit the options of what your dog needs to retrieve, making that portion easier. As the dog gets better and better at locating the specific retrieve item that you need, you can start adding in distraction items back into the fridge. When you do add distraction items back in, you are going to want to start by putting them on different shelves and then putting them on the same shelf but in the back of the fridge so it's really easy to locate. You also want to think about where you're going to place your retrieve items so that it's pretty much at head height for your dog so it's really easy for them to get to. I also like to use a training fridge when possible instead of the real fridge that I'm going to have them use in the end. And that's twofold. One, some dogs can get exuberant and potentially damage a fridge when, like either with their paw or by pulling on it too hard, things like that. So we want to use something cheap that we don't mind getting damaged. So I used the one, before I got the cute one that's in here, I used one from my college days that doesn't even work anymore because it doesn't have to work. You can grab one off of Facebook Marketplace. Sometimes you're free recycle programs, that kind of thing, will have fridges that don't work, and you can use those for practice. We also are going to potentially make mistakes on this object, so I always start off of the object, like when we're teaching retrieves or anything else, I want to start with ultimately with the thing that I don't care about, and then polish it up, and then bring it to the thing that I do care about. Next, we're gonna attach a rope to the inside door of the fridge, and you can do that to a shelf, or I've duct taped rope on in the past as well. And I do that because I wanna be able to put the rope away. Typically when I'm training a new behavior, I wanna put the item, if it's like item centric, I put that item away when the training session is done. It's a lot harder to put a fridge away. So if I put the rope away, then I don't have a dog who is going up and trying to pull on the rope and open the fridge, especially if it is a working fridge, when I'm not there. I make sure to tuck that rope away every time the training session is over, especially before the behavior is under stimulus control, or meaning that the dog only does it when asked. Now, regarding the retrieve item, I generally start by teaching them to retrieve water from the fridge. I do that because I can use a plastic bottle, and I choose smaller sized plastic bottles. That way, if an accident happens, they puncture it for some reason, it's not going to make a huge mess like some other types of beverages might. Also, when they're going into the fridge, the dog has to, so their mouth is like this, right? Mouth here. They have to turn their mouth to be able to grab the item out of the fridge because it's tighter shelves, and then turn back to bring it to you. And when we have a larger item, so a taller water bottle, it's a little bit harder to do that. So we start with a smaller one that's easy for them to make that transition, and then we can build on that and go up to bigger items or different items. If we're talking about transitioning from the water to, say, a beverage, an adult beverage from the fridge, I also will put a koozie on it, so like the little jackets for beers, and have them retrieve that to start, because a lot of dogs are more averse to retrieving metal. So you can practice having them retrieve that item out of the fridge first, but then when you put it in the fridge, putting a koozie on it can help them grip it, especially when it's cold. Okay, so now let's get back to the back chaining. So, like we said, back chaining is training the last behavior first and then going up in succession. So that's going to make it easier for your dog to be successful. They always know what happens next. And that's a great way to teach a complicated behavior. So we want to start with being able to turn back and shut the fridge. So when we're thinking about that, we want to first train our dog to shut the fridge. I have resources on how to train each one of these things. I will put them in the comments and in the description for you to look at those videos. I have a full video on how to teach a dog to shut something. But basically we're going to use, I start with a target like a flag, teach them to touch the flag, and then I put the painter's tape on the fridge and teach them to shut the fridge using that painter's tape mark as to where to put their nose, and then I pull that off of the fridge. But there's this other thing that's going on when we're talking about closing the door to the fridge, and that's that I need them to turn back towards the fridge. And this is really hard for dogs. So they bring you the item and then they forget what to do because they're staring at you and the fridge is no longer in their view. And for people like me with object impermanence, I get that, right? It's no longer in my view, it no longer exists. So we need to teach the dog to be able to turn away from us and go back to the fridge. And we can do that through our reward placement. So once I have a dog who's able to shut the fridge, I can start doing my reward placement so that the dog takes the food from me, and when I ask them to push the fridge again, they have to turn around and back to the fridge. And that is why back chaining is so effective, because they will have this down and practice this the most out of all the skills, because it is one of the harder ones. Another thing that can happen with the shutting the door portion, a little troubleshooting tip for you, is sometimes they won't close it all the way. All I'm gonna do is hold off on marking. So marking is when I am taking a picture of the behavior I want. Usually I use a clicker or the word yes. So I'm gonna hold my mark until they go back, and they're usually like, oh, I forgot to do it all the way. And they'll push it again. I'll mark and reward for that. Remember, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. Anytime I mark, the dog is expecting the reinforcer. And in this case, it's going to be food. So it's click and then treat. So I just hold out for a second. The dog is like, oh, and then they push it close. Mark and reward. Now, if that happens more than one time in a row, I need to go back and train my foundations for closing doors again, because it's obvious that my dog is a bit confused as to what to do or doesn't understand that the criteria is to close the door all the way. Now, the next step is to bring the item to the handler. Now, these two are pretty related because the dog needs to be able to locate and pick up the water to be able to bring it to handler. But when I'm starting this out, I actually don't train it in the fridge. I'm gonna keep the fridge out of it, and I'm going to just start by having them retrieve the item to hand from the ground, from a low table, anything like that. So I'm going to practice having my dog retrieve the item to my hand. My hand is the target that the dog should come to. Now I've done a lot of videos on the retrieve. I will put them down below, but really what we're looking for is the dog to target the hand. When we're first starting that out, we don't even use a retrieve item for that. We just teach them to go out, pick up a treat, and come back to the hand. That's gonna really solidify the item goes in the hand. So once I have a dog that can pick up the water from the floor, from anywhere I ask, then we're gonna go back and start using the fridge to be able to locate the item and pick it up. Here is where it's really important that your shelves are cleaned off. It's really clear what the item is that your dog should be getting for. In this step 2, we might want to name it if your dog doesn't already have a name. That's something I would work on separately if there is going to be any confusion, or if you have other items your dog to retrieve from the fridge. So if you have 2 different things, you're going to have to name them. I do have a video on how to name retrieve items. I'll put that as a link as well. But typically most people are only going to have their dog retrieve one specific item from the fridge, and because of that, you generally don't have to spend that much time on labeling the item if they don't have to do any item discrimination. Now, troubleshooting tip in the fridge: if your dog is struggling with being able to turn their head to get to the item, you can experiment with where in the fridge it might be easiest for your dog to grab the thing. And then also, you can flip it to the side for them. So another good reason to use a closed water bottle is if they're struggling, you can start by just training them to pick up the water bottle when it's already flat and easier for them to pick up. Okay, so now we're gonna be working on the rope section of opening the fridge. So this is all under opening the fridge, but the first thing that we needed to do is teach them to drop the rope. I have a video on teaching the drop cue, and what you're gonna do is you're going to practice dropping items away from the fridge. So again, we're not starting with the fridge pull, we're starting with other items. Can they drop a ball? Can they drop a leash, that if you offer them the leash and have them take the leash, can they drop that? We want our dropping skills to be really good because we want to make sure that they don't take the rope in their mouth and then try to grab onto the water, because that's not going to work out very well. So now let's talk about the picking up the rope and the backing up portion of this. So there's 2 ways to teach the dog to open the fridge. One is to teach them to tug it open. If your dog has a cue that means tug on this, so generally you can teach that just with a tug toy, you can use that. However, Denver is a very enthusiastic tugger, and I don't want to associate that enthusiasm with the fridge. Now, Whip, I used her tug cue to teach the opening of the fridge because she's a very gentle dog. She's a strong tugger, but generally when we're working through a shaped behavior, she is a gentle dog. So I didn't have to worry about her trying to pull the fridge over. She's also only 40 pounds, where Denver is now like above 55. So I didn't want him to tug on the fridge because he's going to pull it with him. So instead, I wanted to teach a more nuanced behavior, a more gentle behavior, and that is 2 parts: walking backwards and picking up the rope. So we need to pick up the rope and walk backwards, but first we need to teach him to walk backwards. So I teach to walk backwards so there's lots of different ways to teach it. A lot of people use pressure. I don't. I use a rear foot target for that. So I have a whole video over on Patreon on a deep dive on teaching that rear foot target and why it's useful. But basically I teach them to back up until they hit a rear foot target because it teaches straightness, it teaches independence. I don't need to put pressure on them to get them to do the thing. So that's how I teach my backup. Then I combine that with picking up and holding the rope. This is part of your retrieve, right? Is being able to pick something up. And so I do have that as a free resource over on Patreon, the first part of my retrieve series, the hold. If you join as a free member, you can see the first part of that series. It's like a 45-minute little deep dive. You can get that totally for free. And that's going to teach you how to teach your dog to want to pick up and hold an item. So when we're talking about little brief summary here, we're gonna start with teaching them to touch or target that item. And usually they will start to do other things like open their mouth. When they open their mouth, we mark and reward. So now we have a dog that's able to pick up the rope, and we're going to teach them to hold it, again, in that little series, and then walk backwards. So now we've got the rope in our mouth and we're cueing them to take it. So which we can practice all of this off the fridge. We can just take a rope, practice with them, and you can cue them to take it and then cue their backup.
Back up. Nice. Good job.
right? And if you need to, if you have a cue for hold, if it's take it, hold, and back up, that's fine. Usually my take it cue it's combined with my hold cue, so they should take it until I tell them to drop it or do something else. So it's take it, back up. Once they can do that away from the fridge, then we bring it to the fridge. Good. Back up. Good. Back up. Back up. Back up. Good. Very nice. Sit. Wait. Take it. Good. Take it. Good. Take it. Take it. Take it. Back up. And we're going to take it back up. Nice. Awesome work. Take it back up. Nice. Take it back up. Nice. Honey. Take it back up. Nice. Take it back up. Okay, good job. Take it back up. Nice. Take it back up. Awesome. Good boy. Very nice, bud. Take it back up. Nice. Good job. So now we've trained all the components, and you can train them in whatever order you want, but the way that we combine them, that's where the back chaining comes in. So we're gonna start with having them shut the fridge, and then we're gonna add bring the thing to handler. So you can kind of look at these as like three kind of portions. So you've got the turn and shut the fridge as one thing, you've got the bring it back to handler and the pickup as one thing, and you've got this get open the fridge as one thing. So we're gonna train this in a backward formation. So practicing the most is being able to turn towards the fridge and shut it. Once we're doing well with this, then we're going to add the locate and pick up the water. What does that mean? That means that my fridge is already open. So I'm practicing this part of the behavior with the fridge open, then asking them to shut it until I can tell them water and they go and shut the fridge after. Under water. Good job, bud. So now that we have a dog that can pick up the water from an open fridge and then shut the fridge, we need to incorporate this first section of opening the fridge. Now, sometimes what I'll do here is just work on these two portions. So I'll go back, start with just can you open the fridge? Can you open the fridge? As a little bit of a warm up, and then can you drop the rope? That's a part of that. And then I'll have them open the fridge, get me the water, mark and reward for that. So then I will go back, work on these two pieces together, and then combine all the pieces together, starting with that word. So when I can get to the point where the dog is able to do all of these things in order on cue, I'll start adding that first word and see if he can start doing them with less deliberate cueing. So I may start with take it, see if he'll pull without me needing to give the back up, and then you go from there. Most of the time, by the time you've done all of this, the dog pretty much is on autopilot and can do the entire thing with a little bit of help from the handler. Take it, back. Water, fetch. Then water. Good, right here. Bring it, bring it, bring it. Nice. Good job. Push. Push. Nice. Good job. Good. Awesome, buddy. Denver water. Awesome. That was fabulous. Wow. What an amazing boy you are. Wow. While you're doing this, I also want you to think about reward placement and how that can help a dog or potentially make it harder for the dog if you're trying to proof a behavior. So when you're placing yourself and the reward, depending on where you are in relation to the fridge, it can be easier or harder, especially with closing the door, things like that, or where they're located from the start. So if your dog is, for instance, on this side of the fridge to start, it's harder for them to get to the rope. They can't even see it. So this is something I would practice only after they've been really successful opening it quite a few times. Whereas if you are doing the delivery to hand and your dog needs to close the fridge, well, if you're over here and the fridge is open, it is way harder for your dog to go around the fridge to close it. So this is something you actually have to practice versus if I'm over here, it's much easier for the dog to push from this direction and get it closed. So when I'm practicing these things, I kind of work around the clock. Say I wanted to have them close the fridge. I would start over here where it's easier and then slowly move myself and the reinforcement to different locations to have them close the fridge. Now, this is all stuff that can be done separately from that behavior chain. This is what we call where we want to train that behavior to fluency no matter where we are. Now, once you have all of that down, you're going to want to generalize. So that means generalizing to different fridges. If this is the practice fridge and you're going to use the real kitchen fridge, you need to train for that. You want to look at, like I said, your location to the fridge, your dog's location from the fridge, distance to the fridge, is the fridge out of sight? We want to train for all of those scenarios. And the other thing that we want to train for is single events. So one of the things that you may not know that you're cueing your dog with is before I start a training session, I go over here and I put this rope out. That's a cue to the dog of what I want them to do, right? So what I want to do is have that out already and do a single event rep. The other thing that we, is part of the cue sometimes is putting the thing in the fridge. So if your dog has the thing in their mouth and you put it back, that can be a cue that you want the dog to do it again. So instead, we need to go, be in a training session and then ask for that retrieve to see if they actually know it outside of the context of a training session. So that's it. That is how I train a fridge retrieve. If you want to see more free tutorials like this one, be sure to let me know down in the comments. Subscribe to that channel, hit that little bell, and check out this video next. I know you're going to love it. You all have an awesome day and happy training.